So this is the mobile version of Transport Tycoon, the newest version for Android. And I'm going to try Boulder Breakers, which is one of the tutorials, I shouldn't say tutorials, I should say beginner scenarios, which is also in Locomotion. And my record as of the time I started this was 1 year, 9 months to complete the performance index of 10%, which is the scenario goal. And you can see some of the visuals are different from Locomotion. It isn't an absolute copy. And you have the graphical keyboard here, virtual keyboard. And I'm using my real name for once, and my character is one of the least silly looking. But I'm going to change the livery. Pink and white is not a very common livery. I did some research into pink railway liveries, and I didn't really find anything, although they could exist, possibly. It's rare. So I'll go with red and white, which a few different railroads have used over the years. Like SBB and Deutsche Bahn, and also DPP, the transit authority in Prague, although I've mentioned sometimes that's cream and red. For some reason they keep asking me about quitting whenever I use the escape key when I'm using a keyboard. It's not really designed to be used with a keyboard, it is designed to be used with a touchscreen, which is awkward if you prefer a keyboard and mouse, certainly. Now, this scenario is actually quite easy in the sense that you have an iron mine and a coal mine, every incarnation of it, respawn, if you will. Here's the iron mine. And you have a steel mill down to the south there. So if you connect the coal mine and the iron mine to the steel mill, it can then transport steel to a factory. Now notice you can do double tracks in the newest version of Transport Tycoon. No other Transport Tycoon version has that except for trams. So Locomotion will let you do it for trams. But I believe this is the first version of Transport Tycoon actually endorsed by Chris Sawyer, which will support double-tracked heavy rail without laying the lines separately. And this is one of my pet peeves about it. I would rather have a double-track option on all of them. And you can rotate the scene as in Locomotion. It's handy. Scrolling the map is a little bit harder. You have to basically use left click and drag. It's really your only option, only realistic option. I assume that on a touchscreen you would use your finger for that. Don't know how easy that would be. I'm quite skeptical that it would work actually. So I'm going to put two stations side by side, which in the newest version of Transport Tycoon, as in Locomotion, are basically platforms, which you can expand. But notice that just clicking in multiple locations doesn't work. You have to use this little plus button over here. And I'm going to make most of these stations 5 squares long, map squares. It's ideal for the types of trains I want to run, which is basically a locomotive and 4 freight cars. In this case, 4 wagons. As in Locomotion, the wagons are used both for iron ore and coal. So when you tell it to load, you have to be specific. So I put in a station there. 5 map squares long. And I will now need a train, I think. Is there anything I'm forgetting? Yes. Just go to the trains. So the consolidation there, the Baldwin 280, is ideal for this. I want a heavy freight engine. Of course, in 1925, the railroads in America would have probably used a Mikado for this, but who cares? They would have still had consolidations. So, consolidation and 4 wagons in the British sense. In America, we actually had these in the 19th century, and they were usually called jimmies. They weren't exactly the same, but they were similar. By the 1920s, the U.S. was actually using hopper cars for the most part. All the railroads in the U.S. pretty much, except for narrow gauge. So I have to tell it to load. This interface I feel is a little bit more awkward than the Locomotion interface, if it's actually possible. I've said before, this is not my favorite version of Transport Tycoon. I also haven't placed it yet. I thought I had. See, and again, the confusing interface has made it hard to get the placement button to come up there. I could try doing the schedule. Place it there. There, finally gave me the button. See, again, that would be something that could stand a redesign. So this actually selects that station to stop at. I'll tell it to take a full load of coal, and very, very similar interface in that respect to, at least in terms of the icons, to Locomotion. Then I tell it to stop at Breakers Bridge, which is the steel mill station. So Boulder Bay Mines to Breakers Bridge will be my first rail route. The thing about Boulder Breakers as a scenario is that it's very heavily biased to heavy rail. You don't generally have to put in any trucks or buses in this. There is an argument for a tram line for passengers only, of course, from Beachtown through all the towns, given a crescent shape, but it will not make you as much money as these freight trains. This is an unusually freight-friendly scenario for the Transport Tycoon series. So here I have to figure out the best way to snake this track around. As you can see, it's much, much, much more forgiving for laying track over hilly terrain than most of the older Transport Tycoon versions, I would argue, including Locomotion. Although that could be just my imagination. I don't think it would have taken that bit of hill there quite as easily in Locomotion. Would have had to do some terraforming, I think. But not this time. I am just about ready to turn. There we go. In terms of my track laying. And I'll put in another platform for iron only. This, of course, is another thing that's great about the scenario, is that you don't have to mix different train services on the same track. So your signaling disadvantages that come with using Transport Tycoon as opposed to something with better AI don't actually come into play. Generally, if you construct the railways the way I've constructed them here, they'll run pretty well, actually. in this scenario. This scenario does make it very easy for you compared with some of the more complex ones. I know that in Locomotion, at least, traffic management can get to be a pretty big problem pretty fast because the AI is really inadequate. So you must be built on track. That's just because I'm dragging along to scroll the map. As I said, it's an awkward way of implementing it, which is basically a result of them accommodating the touchscreen. So I'll get another consolidation here, because this will be another heavy freight. So the wagon, again, the British style wagon on a train led by an American locomotive. Although the British had some 280s, but they didn't call them consolidations, and they naturally didn't look quite like this. So like the Stanier 8F on the London, Midland and Scottish, and the, I think it was Churchward 2800 goods on the Great Western. Here I have to deal with this clunky interface again, figuring out how to convince it to do what it's supposed to do all along. So, seems unwilling to select beach-down mines here, even though I know it should. Maybe if I cycle through the views here a little bit. Now this is awkward too, like the trains are very hard to scroll through too. You have to basically drag, which is counterintuitive. Okay, so I'm going to load the train. Oops, that was not intentional. That should not be coal, that should be iron. So, deal with that in a minute. So first we'll add Breaker's Bridge and then we'll get rid of this. So what it needs is iron, not coal. There is no coal to load there. So, I have to tell it to go, of course, just like in all the other versions of Transport Tycoon. Now I will build another rail line leading from the steel mill to the factory. So by the time I get this built, there'll probably be plenty of steel waiting there. I have to put in a track for the station here. Only a single track line with only one purpose, because in this scenario it's all you need. I'll try and put in a station here. Unlike in the Transport Tycoon Deluxe playthrough I did, there will probably not be any political wrangling about this. Generally, the governments of the towns are less political in Locomotion and the new Transport Tycoon for mobile. So it says incompatible with existing piece, which makes no sense. I think that's maybe because everything's already there? Let's see. Let's just try and put in a station. Again. Alright, now we're getting somewhere. 5 sections as before, on 5 map squares. And that is counted as a separate station, even though it's close to the original Breaker's Bridge there. I should rename these, actually. Question is, how's the best way to do that? So if I click on the station name. It should let me rename it, but it's fighting me here for some reason. Rotate, try it again. Rotate the map, I mean. Maybe if I click on the station in the list here. I click up here. Maybe click on the pen. That's probably the dead giveaway. Okay, so I will fiddle around with the virtual keyboard here. What should I call this? Express. I don't know how many stations are really called Express, but that's what this is. It will be for goods. And I'm going to put in another track and platform for passengers and mail. So then that's proper Express, not just fast freight. Of course, in real life, in the old steam days, the steam era, the fastest freights were generally reefer expresses. You could say, well, what about mail trains? Well, mail trains were considered passenger trains in both the US and the UK, if I'm not mistaken. Mail trains generally used modified passenger cars or mail cars based on passenger car bodies and trucks or bogies. And again, the reason was speed. They could be as fast or faster than a passenger train. But the reefer expresses were the fastest real freights, you could argue, were considered freights, because they had to get produce and meat to market before they spoiled, and before the ice melted and spoiled the goods. Alright, so we're not going to build any reefer expresses here. We don't have any appropriate customers for that. But all of a sudden, I've done so well that before I've even finished building my rail network, I've won the challenge. Which kind of illustrates that this scenario is pretty easy, actually. Basically, the scenario has a very easy pairing of industries and short distances. So you get the idea. Cool. This is another record for me. 9 game months. So, for me, that's lightning quick. I didn't even get into game year 2. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.